Every single pitch changes the scenario of the baseball game. We trust analytics more than we do our own eyes.
Really, the reaction doesn't really matter what you and I think. It's what the fans think.
A lot of things obviously aren't said on the radio that a lot of people would like to say. And we got enough artificial intelligence in baseball right now, and a lot of them went to Ivy League schools. No, the days of Cal Ripken are gone. The days of playing 162 games are gone. And I think that is a good thing. I don't want my guys playing every day. I want them well rested. Shoot, even a farmer gives his soil a year off.
The political correctness is driving me crazy.
The great managers are the ones that don't win games. They just don't lose games as often. But that's not the last time I'm going to correct you. That won't be the last time you're wrong about something. I'm going to let you know about that. I'm going to take you places that you wish you always went. How's that? And welcome to A View from Center Field.
Welcome to A View from Center Field. My name is Andy Van Slyke. Joining me once again is my partner to help me along to understand this game better, which he's had the privilege to do for the last 30 years or so, Rob Rains, a former beat writer for the St. Louis Cardinals baseball team. He's written 30 books, so Rob's knowledge in baseball is vast and way beyond my intellect. So welcome, Rob.
Welcome, Andy. Thanks for that kind introduction.
Well, everything I always say about you is usually true.
I've never known you to make a false statement in your life.
That's a lie. So, Rob, you are presently in Florida. You've been in Florida spring training.
Yes.
Following the Cardinals, and I guess we might as well start with you seeing anything that really sticks out so far in spring training that's going on down in Florida.
The one thing that strikes me as being different about this spring training this season than some of the years in the past is that, and we talked about this a little bit on our first episode of the podcast here, is that the game started so early. You know, the first games were February 23rd. That's usually about the day that most players just kind of show up to start getting ready for spring training, and it's usually about March 1st or so, March 2nd, 3rd, somewhere in there. You're playing a couple inter-squad games, and then you're getting going with the season. So it seems to me, even though we're still in the first week of March, so we've been playing games for almost 2 weeks, and it seems like we ought to be about 2 weeks away from starting the season, and we're still a lot longer away than that.
And because you are down there every day, you get a feel for what the coaches are saying, the manager's saying. I get it. As a coach, as a former coach in the big leagues, you got to say all the right things. The manager has always got to be politically correct within the organization. He has to protect the game of baseball, which I understand. But how the players reacting to this very short time of getting ready for games, and then maybe not physically totally ready to play games live.
Well, I think they're being really careful with protecting, especially the star players. When you got some guys that are just still now getting a couple at bats, 3 at bats, they're rotating in and out of the DH position. So they're not really going at it 100%. You see, them trying to get working on their timing, working on the swing, but they're not, certainly not in mid-season form yet. And I don't think they want to be. I mean, the main goal, I think, at this point is twofold. I think the players are trying to get themselves into shape and be, game shape. And we talked about, the speed of the game and the, quality of the bats and things like that. But I also think they're mainly trying to not get hurt. And I think that's something, you see injuries every year in spring training. We had Brett Honeywell already go down to Tampa Bay camp with a torn UCL that's going to be require Tommy John surgery. Matt Carpenter in the Cardinals camp still has not been able to get on the field because of a back injury that's keeping him, off the field. He's making some progress working on the side.
Speaking of Carpenter, he had issues last year with his back that kept him out.
He had issues with his oblique and his shoulder too.
So is this something that I've had a bad back. It's shortened my career, shortened my time on the field. It's just something they're really concerned about because when it comes to backs, you are rotating an awful lot in the game of baseball, just not hitting-wise, but also when you're playing defense, there's a lot of rotation taking place, especially you got to remember he's playing the infield now, so he's bending over a lot. He's taking ground balls. And if he plays first base, he's going to be in a position where he has to take a lot of little throws. Is that going to be something that's going to be problematic for him?
We don't know yet. I mean, I think it is a concern. I mean, it's kind of the first thing you talked about being politically correct and not saying the wrong thing. All they're saying is that they're, hoping to see him on the field soon. He's making progress. Manager Mike Matheny joked the other day that he carried the rosin bag out to the mound, so that was encouraging, and that he did take the lineup card out the other day because he wanted to meet Paul Molitor. So, he's making kind of little cracks like that. But I think their feeling is that if he's back on the field playing by the middle of March, don't forget he also, wasn't able to play in the World Baseball Classic last year because of an injury he had in spring training a year ago. So there is some concern there about that, I think. But they're towing the party line at this point, saying there's still plenty of time, as we talked about, because you have almost a month now until the regular season begins on March 29th. So there's still time. But if we get another week or 10 days into spring training and still hasn't been on the field, then I would think it becomes a lot greater concern.
Would it be safe to say we won't be seeing Matt Carpenter going first to third at all on a base hit?
Well, he actually talked about we didn't see
that when he was healthy.
Right. He talked about his goal of becoming a better base runner back at the winter warm up in St. Louis in January. So I mean we can't get a reading on that yet since he hasn't been on the field.
I really think it's one of those things that are instinctive, Rob. You can't teach baseball IQ. That's the one thing. You can work on fundamentals, but when it comes to the instincts of the game, I think either you got it or you don't. It's really, really difficult to be a good teach somebody how to be a good base runner. I've tried and it doesn't work. It really doesn't work.
That's one of the tasks they've assigned to Willie McGee. The former Cardinal outfielder who's on the major league staff now for the first time as a special assistant coach.
Willie McGee teaching base running.
He's going to teach base running.
You saw Willie McGee run the bases.
Right, fast. He's very fast. I think
he was fast. He was fast.
They actually have been stealing a lot of bases in spring training. I mean, I know those are kind of unusual numbers, and you don't put a lot of stock in spring training results in any form or fashion. But they pulled off 2 days in a row. They pulled off a double steal, delayed steal, and got a run out of it on a steal at home. So I don't know that we're going to see that kind of aggression on the bases once the regular season begins. And I think stolen bases is an interesting thing. And you were one of the guys on replay that usually got a fair number of stolen bases a season, and played in an era where the stolen base seemed to be a bigger part of the game than it is now. And I think I wish we'd get that back. I mean, I miss that element of the game. The speed, I think, does play a role in making defenses, make mistakes. And I think it plays a role in kind of manufacturing some runs that, you don't have to sit there and wait for somebody to hit a home run. I wish we'd get back to that style of baseball.
That's not where the game is today. Speaking of home runs, on March 1st, the scientists from USC came out with a study of the juice baseball. Did you get a chance to see that study of the X-rays of Major League Baseball as compared from 2014 and 15 to 2016 and 17 and what it revealed?
Yeah, I read the one story on the 538.com piece. I didn't see the actual complete study by the USC people. I kind of take personally my own opinion on that is that I think it's all kind of trumped up evidence. I don't really think there's anything different about the baseball. I don't think
you know what? You and I couldn't disagree more.
Well, that's fine. I mean, everybody's got their own opinion. I mean, I don't think it. The game is played the same as it was before, and I think that's helping create more home runs. But I don't really think there's anything different about the baseball.
Well,
personally.
Scientifically,
I know scientifically maybe they have studies that show that but we saw bats that were corked and everything else too back in the day.
Yeah, but this is different. We're talking about the ball. We're talking about it's sort of like the difference between a balata ball and a three-piece golf ball that the guys on tour are using today. They're different. I'm telling you, Rob, the balls are different. You only had, let me see this stat. You had, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 41 home runs in 2015. Mm-hmm. You broke a record last year. Now,
but everybody's still using the same. But if everybody's still using the same baseball, what does it matter?
I don't think it makes a difference. That's not the point. The point is the game has changed because the ball has changed, and the emphasis now is hitting the ball in the air and swinging and missing. If you happen to swing and miss, so what?
Yeah, well, I agree with that. I do agree with that.
Putting the ball in play is not something that is emphasized anymore.
But don't you think you could still win games doing that? And
No, I'm not
hitting an
saying you
occasional home
can't.
run?
I'm not saying you can't, but unless, and here's the thing, unless you are going to be 80% successful before you leave first base to try to steal second, you just park yourself right at first base.
Right. I agree with that too.
Yeah. So because the physics, the physiologically, the players have changed. The emphasis, the emphasis on drafting players for speed is not what it used to be.
True. I agree.
Okay, so now that's my point. The game has changed. So the idea of the game going back to where it was back in the 80s when you had pitching and defense and speed be the emphasis, and if you happen to hit home runs. I mean, look at what we did at the 1985 Cardinals went to the World Series and should have won the World Series with hitting what was it, 87 home runs? 97? So less than 100.
They barely beat Roger Maris, I think, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. The 314 stolen bases.
Exactly. If you just look at the x-rays
Right.
at 538.com, you can see the density difference. And not only that, I was a coach and I noticed the difference in the baseballs. When you look at the resistance factor alone with the seams being lower and the ball's not breaking as much when they're trying to be spun by the pitcher.
Right.
You got less wind resistance. When the seams are lower, the ball's going to go further.
So it makes sense, yeah.
It makes total sense. Because less air resistance means what? Less drag. Drag means what? Air resistance is less, and the ball is going to travel the distance the ball is going to fly. It's going to go a lot further. I mean, so according to this study, the ball could fly as much as almost 8.5 feet further than it did just a few years ago. And that's why we have seen a 25% increase in the number of home runs since 2014. The ball is juiced. Now, having said that, I think the ball is juiced. But the question is that something that Major League Baseball is going to either fix or just let it play out the way it has played out the last couple of years?
Well, they don't seem to be doing anything about it if they think it is. No.
And really the reaction doesn't really matter what you and I think. It's what the fans think.
Correct.
So
if they think offense sells and people want to go see, what was the old television commercial and back in the day with Greg Maddux and Tom Glavine, chicks dig the long ball.
Yes, they do.
So I think that's still true. I mean, people get excited by home run. I mean, we saw it, with the Mark McGwire, Sammy Sosa chase. I mean, I think there was.
Isn't it really?
Almost nobody cared if the team won or lost the game. It was just that they hit a home run.
Isn't it really interesting that back in the late '90s? Now think about this. Back in the late '90s, the players were steroided up, were juiced up, and it saved the game from the strike from '94.
Mm-hmm.
Now the ball's juiced. And it's continued the excitement in the game in 2000. 2 decades later.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it, to be honest with you, until you brought up that story to my attention. But maybe there is something to that. I don't know.
There is something to it. So there's definitely has been, a physical shift and a psychological shift in the way that hitters have approached the game. And if the fans love it, I think they'll continue to do it. Now the game's going to be lengthened, and that seems to be an issue for Major League Baseball.
Yes, it does.
So if they go back to the balls where they were 5 years ago, you're going to have shorter games because the balls are going to be ending up on the warning track, being caught by outfielders instead of going another 8% or 8.5% further over the fence.
Don't you think the games would also be shorter if the umpires would be a little more consistent on calling the strike zone?
Well, another reason. The strike zone's gotten smaller.
Right.
So it's a combination of those factors.
Even though it hasn't changed in the rule book, it has gotten smaller in reality.
Well, it has gotten smaller in reality because there's nobody who wants to go home at night. No umpire that wants to go home at night. See that he struck out a guy with the bases loaded in the 7th, 8th, or 9th inning with a ball that happened to be 6 inches outside.
Right. If it's a strike, it's a strike, though, right?
If it's a ball, it's a ball. What do you mean it's a strike, it's a strike?
I'm saying is I also think you got guys that are pitches up at the knees or on the and at the armpits or whatever that in olden days would have been called a strike that are now called a ball.
Well,
like
there
you
was
said, because of the small restriction.
Well, here's the thing: the umpires have never, ever had the scrutiny that they have today.
Correct.
You didn't have the boxes. You didn't have all the technology. You didn't have the high definition. You didn't have the strike zone box. And so the way they rate umpires today is vastly more it got more technology to distinguish whether an umpire is a good ball strike umpire or not.
Yeah, I think that's probably another conversation for another day about whether all the technology is good for the game or not. It's another thing that's changed over the game, since you first broke in and started playing, and even I think in the days when you were coaching in Detroit and Seattle, I think it's different now than it was then. And I think there's some things to be said for that. It has improved the game. I think there's some things that probably you wish they hadn't messed with, but that's just like we said before, we're not going back to the way it was.
No, I don't think we are. So
speaking back to the way it was, what do you think is the biggest difference between spring training when you played and when you coached, and then the way it's conducted today?
Well, I think philosophically nothing's really changed. You just you got to. The manager's job is to get he knows he's got, dependent on the team again, he's got his 20 to 25, 23 guys or whatever that he knows he needs to get ready for the season. So you really break it up. You got your starters and your pitchers, and then you have a handful of guys that are going to be fighting for a spot. And you try to get those guys fighting for a spot the most looks that you can. And I don't think that philosophy has changed whatsoever. And
what do you think has changed though?
Well, I think I don't think managers and organizations are really concerned about getting players a lot of at bats before the season starts anymore. It was really part of the philosophy when I came in. You need a lot of at bats to get ready for the season, and I found out that was true for me. That I needed a lot of at bats in spring training, as my career got moved on in my 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th year, that I needed those at bats to figure out whether I was right or wrong getting ready for the season.
One thing I've never figured out about spring training, all the years that I've been here covering it, I think this is my 36th or 37th spring training, something like that. The schedule is totally contrary to the schedule that you keep in baseball during the regular season. You're at the park by 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and you're out of there, 4 or 5 in the afternoon, unless you're playing at Wrigley Field, Chicago, when you're still out there at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning. Why and I know they're going to say it's because they want the games played during the daytime, but I don't understand why they don't have more night games in spring training and have teams report at 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, kind of get used to that body, used to that clock that you're going to keep, starting in April. All of a sudden they flip a switch and you're playing all night games instead of, after a month of playing day games, getting up at 7 in the morning.
It's tough. There's no question about it. There is a rhythm that it's hard to change. There's no question about that. The hardest part about spring training to me recently, the things that have changed, is the night games. Now you have night games.
A few. Cardinals play one also this spring.
Well, that's good. That's a good thing. I know when I was coaching in Arizona with the Mariners, we had quite a few night games. Now that's rough. That's physically tough, especially on the coaching staff and the manager. The people have to be there all morning, all afternoon, all night, and then turn around and come back the next day. I mean, that's really a tough deal. And I understand why they do night games. They want to try to get an opportunity for people who don't get a chance to go to games during the day because they're working. But shoot, not everybody works, Monday through Saturday or Monday through, Sunday. So you still have the weekends to go see a Major League Baseball game. And most of the people, you got to remember also, that are going to these games aren't locals anyways. They're retirees and they're people on vacations. Yeah.
Sure.
So why they play night games is there's only one reason why they do it, because they think they can make money in the process.
Well, that's the only reason baseball does anything, right?
Sure, that's fine. The players understand that. So everybody's getting rich, and that's okay.
Interesting story. Speaking of money in the Cardinals camp this week, kind of an interesting study in contrast. Within a few hours, they awarded a new 6-year contract to shortstop Paul DeJong with less than 1 year of major league service time, $26 million, the largest contract ever for a player with that short of service time. And then the other kind of best position player they had in the Cardinals last year, Tommy Pham, about 2 hours later gets his contract renewed for a salary just a little bit above the minimum.
Yeah.
Kind of an interesting study. I mean, the main difference, of course, that, they were able to work out the long-term deal with Pham because he wanted to get a deal done. He's only 24 years old, plays a premium position at shortstop. Tommy Pham's 30 years old, is coming off a really good year, but it was the only good year he's had in his career, which he's had a lot of problems with his eyesight, had a lot of injuries that he's overcome. And he's, it's going to be an interesting, I think it's trying to watch this season and see how it plays out for both of those two players, because Tommy Pham's convinced that he's, kind of getting the short end of the stick here, and he's going to try to go out and do something about it.
Well, he's got motivation to prove him wrong. I mean, a lot of times that's, that extra motivation can really make a player play above and beyond his talent. So we'll see if that's the case. The one that's really intriguing to me is Paul DeJong's contract. For the life of me, I don't know why the Cardinals didn't wait one season to see whether this was a legit 4 months that they saw. This is a guy that wasn't even a prospect for him, and out of nowhere, God bless him, he had a terrific time when he was at the big league level. But when you look at his track record, it's not there. I mean, the one thing that really worries me is the strikeouts to walk ratio, and if he can figure that one out, then they probably did a good deal. But if he doesn't figure that one out, I think he's really going to struggle.
I can understand why he did. I understand.
I
can understand from a team perspective that is, when you're talking. I mean, it's hard to say $26 million is a small risk, but it really is in baseball terms. Not a really lucrative contract. A couple of options years in there, they could make it, a $51 million deal, but obviously he has to perform for the club to pick up those options. But yet, from a club standpoint, there really was no pressure on them to do this deal, and they've done that in the past with some of these other young guys. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But it just seems like they're eager to kind of get some of their young players locked up to long-term contracts, and I don't know that that's the smartest philosophy in the world.
Well, they've done it in the past, like you said. They did it with Craig.
Right, they did it with Colton Wong. They did it with Matt Carpenter. They've done it with Jaime Garcia. I mean, they've done several of these kind of deals in the last 10 years or so. And
they've they got a good track record, basically. I mean, maybe except for Craig's. I mean, he did flounder after
and he got hurt.
He did get hurt and he never came back from his injury. Yeah, so the total worth of that contract could be up to $50 million. So. Right. That extra $24 million, that really will fall on the Cardinals' shoulders, whether they want to move forward.
But that only comes into play if he actually picks up the options, which means he's had 6 good years, or the basic contract, whether he might have a bad year in there 1 year or another. But I mean, the basic length of the contract, the 6-year contract, means he will have performed up to their expectations or above them for them to pick up the options and guarantee those last 2 years, which again, then it's basically another $25 million on top of the deal that he's going to get regardless of what happens.
Well, I heard John Mozeliak, the general manager of the Cardinals, speak about his character, and
correct.
They are really, really big in when they draft players, their philosophy is they want to figure out who these people are they're drafting. As much as they want to know, they really, really put a big emphasis on that. And I think that was a big factor. They feel like this guy has the character to try to get better. He seems to have it together off the field. And that seems to be, I would say that's probably one of the main reasons why they did it. They figured he came on, he figured it out. And because he has this impeccable character, that they don't think they're going to have any problems with him off the field. So I think that was a main reason why they went ahead and did this.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. What did you ever have an issue with trying to separate the business side of baseball from playing it, and how hard was that to do?
Well, not really. I understood the business side as early on I did. So when I got traded, I think that, I think the biggest, wake up call for me is when I got traded. And, players, here's the thing, when you get drafted by a team, you feel like, I can say this unequivocally, that you really feel better about the organization than the organization feels about you. There's just something about, now maybe it's just because I was a Cardinal, and the Cardinals had a tremendous minor league system. But man, I felt I was going to be a Cardinal the rest of my life, and they made me feel like that. And then you get traded, and it was really, really tough. And when I got traded to Pittsburgh, it was a wake up call that
happened in spring training too.
Yes, it did. The last day of spring training. And so the player, for a lot of players, getting traded for the first time is the hardest part of learning the business side of baseball. It's not necessarily the contract part. It's when you get traded, and 99% of players get traded.
Yeah, the rarity now is players who spend their entire career with one team. That just doesn't happen very much anymore.
Yes,
because of the business side of it.
Yes. Yep.
I mean, Andrew McCutchen is an example of a guy that I think everybody thought would be a Pirate forever. He's going to be playing in San Francisco this year.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure that hurt him, and there's a lot of upset Pittsburgh fans because he was their favorite player. And those poor people in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say those poor people in Pittsburgh. They've seen it over and over again, the business side of baseball. So, the days of a player like Andrew McCutchen not staying with one team are over because of the financial aspects that some organizations just can't meet.
Well, Evan Longoria was the face of the Tampa Bay franchise. He's going to be playing in San Francisco this
year. Yep. It's a reality.
And I think that's hard on the fans. I mean, I really do. I mean, I think you're spoiled in franchises that can afford to keep their players, do a good job of keeping their players, and have it, not necessarily saying they're going to be in the playoffs every year and win every year, but they have, when a season begins, they're going to be competitive and they're going to be in the race, assuming, of course, no catastrophic injuries. But those teams that are never win, it doesn't seem like they ever win. They can't keep their star players. Yeah, I think it would be awfully tough to be a baseball fan in those markets.
I wouldn't want to be. I mean, I really wouldn't want to, to be honest with you, I would want to grow up a Pirate fan. To be, just a couple of years ago, they were on the edge of winning their own pennant. And lo and behold, they trade away Cole, they trade away McCutchen. And gosh darn, this means we have to suffer through a couple more years.
Yeah, because I think there is definitely a correlation between putting a competitive team on the field and drawing fans to the ballpark. And the problem with too now though is the way that the television contracts are structured. A lot of these teams will make money without ever putting a single person in the seats.
What are you trying to tell? Are you saying, Rob, that some of these teams are tanking?
No, I'm not saying they're necessarily tanking. I mean, I think the goal is that.
Oh, sure they are.
Every team's goal is to win. I think there's different ways to go about it.
No, it's not.
Well, their goal is to make money. Their goal is to make money. But
yeah, make money, absolutely. That's their goal. Now, they can say they're going to try to win. They can say that by saying what? We're putting money into our minor league system. We have a 3 or 4 year plan, a 5-year plan. But not every team tries to win every year. It would be impossible for the small markets to say that. And I think it would be totally disingenuous to try to sell that to the fans.
And the Players Union has filed a grievance against 4 of the clubs, the Pirates, the Orioles, the Marlins, and the Oakland A's, saying that they are not trying to win, trying not to improve the ball club. And I've been obviously for the Marlins, the trades that they made, trading Ozuna, trading Stanton, trading Yelich, those are 3 key players who are going to have great success, I think, in their new markets. But at what expense for the Marlins? Okay, they got some prospects in return, but they're not going to have the same level of production that those guys have that they traded.
Well, what really started that was when they lost their starting pitcher, Fernandez.
Sure.
I mean, when he went down in that boating accident, I think that's what started that train. Because I really believe if that kid had, figured out how to not to get in a boat and party a little too hard and crash his boat and kill himself and two of his buddies and continue his baseball career, then we might be talking about the Marlins winning their division. I mean, that's how close they were trying to pull it all together. They had some serious talent down there.
But do you think they still were going to draw enough fans, though, in that ballpark to put, even if they put a winning team on the field?
Probably not. But Houston didn't draw very well.
No, and yet,
for a lot of years.
Right, that's true.
And when you look at Houston's attendance and you look at mine, it was pretty darn close.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the actual numbers. But there again, Houston was a team that took advantage of the rules, like the Cubs did. They sold off some players that they were older players making a lot of money, got some prospects in return because they did not finish well in the standings. They got high draft picks, actually picked number 1 overall 2 years in a row, and took some players that now they're really good players. I mean, they also made a mistake. They took Mark Capel when they could have had Chris Bryant in the draft. And that's probably a mistake. But, they succeeded because of that, and now they're selling out the ballpark and winning the World Series.
What about the Nationals prospect, Seth? Romero. Yeah, I mean, you talk about mistakes.
Well,
does this look like maybe the biggest blunder that the Nationals have made in the last 5 years?
You talk about drafting players with character. I mean, I would be surprised, and I don't have any inside knowledge of this, but I wouldn't even think he was on the Cardinals draft board last year because of all the issues he had at the University of Houston. He got kicked off the team, got suspended so many times, and yet the Washington Nationals thought, oh, yeah, he's a good pitcher. We'll take him. He won't have a problem here. Well, he got sent home from spring training because he violated some team rules. So
he was suspended. He was suspended for 2 weeks last season, the first 2 weeks of the season last year, after getting drafted. I mean, that seems almost impossible.
All it goes to show you is that baseball talent is not, you can have a lot of baseball talent in a body, but it still doesn't make you a baseball player. You have to understand the other things that go with that and the responsibilities that go with that, especially the responsibilities of being a professional. We talked about character a while ago. I mean, I'm not saying that everybody in baseball is a Rhodes Scholar or a Boy Scout, and you don't have to be, but you have to have some understanding of what you're there for, and be a professional.
I understand yes, but how do you pick a guy in the first round, and in the next spring training you kick him? You got to send him home.
Well, obviously,
I know one thing. Whoever's head of the scouting department
has some answering to do.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it.
Well, you got to remember too where the Nationals drafted.
I know one thing. If I made that mistake, I would expect to be fired.
I think it's one of those things too where the Nationals drafted. The Cardinals had this deal come up a couple of years ago too with a kid named Delvin Perez, who was in their farm system now as a shortstop out of Puerto Rico. He had failed a drug test about a week before the draft. He had been expected to be about a top 5 at the lowest pick in the draft. He was that good of a player, and because of the draft, test results, he was still on the board when the Cardinals picked. I think it was the 22nd or 23, and they took him. And he's had some issues, not with the drugs, but just some discipline issues and maturity issues and things like that they're working with him on. And, again, he was a younger player. He was a 17-year-old kid in Puerto Rico, whereas, Romero was a college pitcher in from the U.S., so there is some difference between the two of them. And
we're talking about the first pick of your organization.
Well, Perez was too, that year for the Cardinals. But I'm just saying it's, you do take a gamble with some guys like that. And sometimes it's like we talked about, the talent, if you see a guy that has an awful lot of talent, well, I can, whatever the problems were that person has, you tend to overlook that sometimes because you say, well, we'll fix that. He had those problems because he wasn't with us. We got our people, we trust our people. We'll get that right. We'll get that right. He won't have a problem with us. So, but that's a risk. I mean, as you know as well as I do, that the baseball draft is a weird, study in I don't know, psychological is not the right word, but people, because you get first round picks. They look like they have all the talent in the world, can't miss guys, and they never play a day in the big leagues. And then you get players that were never drafted.
But how much homework? I mean, if you're putting all your cards in your first pick, which you really are, because the success rate, what is it, 65% of first rounders get to the big leagues, and you're spending your most money, so you have your greatest chance of getting this player at the big league level to help you win at a cheaper cost. overall for the next few years. Isn't that supposed to be the philosophy?
Yes.
Didn't they do? I mean, didn't they go talk to his teammates? Did they talk to
I don't
the coaches?
know.
I mean, how do you? I mean, my goodness, this is one of the biggest first round blunders in the history of the game.
Well, it's too early to say that. Maybe it's the wake up
No,
call.
I'm
Maybe
just
he'll
saying.
grow
I'm
up and be a
saying
good
from
pitcher. At this point,
it may
yes.
be.
Yeah, at this point, you can't say that. I mean,
I understand how many number one picks have been sent home their first spring training.
well, I don't know, but I doubt if it's very many.
I would say the first picks. I would say this is the first one. He's the first one. Find out, and make me wrong. That's not the most absurd statement. The most absurd thing about what's going on in baseball right now is that Jake Arrieta does not have a team to pitch for so far this season.
Yeah, how weird is that?
You think that's unbelievable? It's unbelievable that this guy. I mean, I know he's probably not the pitcher he was when he won the Cy Young a couple of years ago, but we're talking about a guy can almost guarantee you at least 200 innings this upcoming season. Those are not easy to find.
Well, you also got a couple of guys that Alex Cobb and Lance Lynn have had very good careers as starting pitchers, middle of the rotation starters. And you got a guy like Mike Moustakas in Kansas City last year at 30-something home runs. You know, here we are 2 weeks into playing games, not just 2 weeks into spring training, 2 weeks playing games into spring training, and they don't have a job either.
So part of that grievance, I would think the Players Association ought to be doing is what's going on? You know, what is really going on here? It's absurd to me that he doesn't have a job.
Arrieta we're talking about?
Yeah. I mean, especially after Darvish gets what is it, 5-year deal for 25, 26
I would
million?
love to know what teams have offered Arrieta and what he has turned down. You know.
The biggest factor, I think, for him not being signed is his agent.
Could be. Same one as
I really think
Moustakas' agent too.
Yep, exactly.
Scott Boras, we'll say the name.
Yeah, Scott Burrows may be the one factor we're talking about here.
And I think the other factor in some of these guys, too, is that we talked about this before. I think one of the mistakes that the union made in negotiating the last CBA is the whole draft pick compensation thing for free agent signings. Because I think some.
Yeah, well, explain that again to me.
Well, there's so many different rules here. It's hard to explain it, and we don't really have enough time left in this podcast to do it.
The
basic thing is if a player signs for more than $50 million as a free agent, then that team that lost that player gets an extra draft pick as compensation. So teams are trying to get players to take shorter deals for less than $50 million because then they won't have to lose a draft pick.
And how I mean that was ridiculous for the Players Association to agree to that one.
I don't know if it was give and take and part of a give and take on something else, some other issue that the union wanted, so they gave in on that. I don't know.
I know one thing: if Don Fehr was still running that show, that wouldn't have happened.
And I think there's enough talk about it that will be a point of conversation in the next negotiations in the next CBA for sure.
I'll guarantee you that's what's killing some of these guys.
Yeah, and they thought it would be easier because they did protect some of the draft picks. They did change it so you don't lose a first-round draft pick on signing a free agent. It would be a later pick, but it hasn't. It has not helped the flow of free agency. I mean, it has slowed it to a crawl. This winter was unbelievable in how slow the market developed for a lot of these guys, and still is stagnant, like we mentioned, for a lot of the bigger name free agents. So we're talking about now, especially from a pitcher standpoint, I don't know that if they signed tomorrow that they would be ready in time to start the regular season.
No, there's no question they wouldn't be ready. There's no question about that. They would not be ready. You think some of this has to do with what's going to happen next year in the free agent market?
There's some big name free agents next year, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, especially when we're talking about Bryce Harper maybe being the first $500 million player.
But you and I both know there's only one or two teams that could afford that.
Sure, but it's still. Here's the thing, it's still going to raise everybody else in the free agent market in the process of him raising that bar.
Manny Machado, Craig Kimbrell. There's
yes,
no one. I think Arenado's a free agent after next year. Kershaw could hit that.
Kershaw.
There's a lot of good names on that board.
Yeah. So
We'll see.
What do they say about tides and boats?
I don't know. What do they say?
All high tides raise all boats.
Oh, okay. I would go on that. So what's your favorite? Let's wrap this up with where we started, kind of a little bit about spring training.
You were at the Marlins Cardinals game today.
I was there briefly. I had a couple other things to know.
Oh, okay. Well, let me explain the type of baseball we might be looking from the Marlins this upcoming season. Monte Harrison, who was a second-round draft pick from Milwaukee, who got traded over to the Marlins,
right?
In that Illich deal. He's actually a kid from St. Louis.
Okay.
Did you know that?
What Hazelwood, right?
Lee Summit. Okay. Lee Summit, Missouri.
Okay,
anyways, he comes in to pinch run with 2 outs in the 9th inning, and my son's at the plate. Scott Van Slyke's at the plate, and he gets thrown out for the 3rd out to end the game at third base with 2 outs.
Ouch.
Now think about that.
That's a fundamental mistake.
Hopefully something that we won't be seeing a lot of in this upcoming season.
Hopefully one of the Marlins coaches and he had a little conversation after the game.
Yeah, but when you've been playing for 3 years, you haven't learned not to make the last out at third base, especially when you're the winning run standing out there with 2 outs. We're talking about a guy that's got speed too.
Right.
I mean, he stole 87 bases in the minor leagues. He's only been caught 15 times. So obviously he's got speed. So
speaking of spring training,
hopefully a learning moment.
Yes.
For all the Marlins who were present.
Speaking of spring training, let's wrap up this episode of the podcast with your favorite, Andy Van Slyke's favorite all-time spring training story, or favorite spring training moment that ever happened to you during your career.
Oh my gosh!
Any good pranks come to mind?
Oh my gosh! Now you're asking me to rack my brain here.
Apart from you're getting traded, which is obviously going to stand out as one spring training moment that you.
That's the worst thing that's ever happened. I mean, April 1st, you go. You come from a team that you're probably going to be in the World Series win to go into the team that finished the last 3 years in a row on April 1st. And you get called into the manager's office, Whitey Herzog, the best manager in the game at the time, and he looks you in the face and says, "Slick, I'm sorry, but I traded you." I go, "Yeah, right." Funny joke. No, I really did. He said. I said, "To where?" He said, "Pittsburgh." I said, "No, you did." That's really the joke. He goes, "No, really. I traded you to Pittsburgh." I said, "Whitey, thanks a lot." So looking back at it now, I can laugh, but at the time it was the most painful moment in my baseball career. I would say my first day I ever spent in spring training was in 1980. I hadn't played the summer I got drafted in 1979. I was the first pick for the Cardinals, and I went down to spring training. And in my first, Ken Boyer was the manager, and Bobby Bonds was on the team at the time. You had Keith Hernandez, and you had all these veteran guys in camp, and we worked out that day. And I went in after the workout. I was one of the last guys in, and all these baseball players with their guts hanging out, and they're not chiseled. They weren't chiseled back then like they are today, Rob.
That's true.
As you probably remember,
they kind of look more like sports writers.
They did look like sports writers. They got all the hairy chests, and they got a few too many inches around their waist, and all these guys shave now everywhere. There's probably less hair on baseball players except their face than any other athletes in the United States. The only hair they got on their bodies are on their face. But anyways, that's a different subject.
Yes.
But I walked in there, and my jaw dropped. Half the team is smoking in their lockers, and they got these little igloo coolers of beer sitting in front of them, and they're popping beers and smoking cigarettes. And I thought to myself, this is not what I envisioned Major League Baseball was like. It was the most eye-opening moment. I think you talk about having an education right away.
Right.
That was it. And to see that the metamorphosis of how athletes, baseball players, and they are athletes, obviously, the way Major League Baseball players go about their business it's not like it was 35, 40 years ago for sure.
No, that
It is.
and I think that's a positive.
It is a positive. Right. Absolutely is a positive. That doesn't mean today's players aren't doing things they shouldn't be doing. I'm not, but I think overall players understand the risk, the short time they have an opportunity to play this game. But, these guys are still partying. They're still smoking their pot and snorting their cocaine. Obviously, they're still snorting their cocaine because we had a guy get killed last year doing it in a boat down in Florida.
Right.
So it's still taking place. And at some point, I think Major League Baseball is going to have to cover that issue because part of the average fan does not realize, Rob, Major League Baseball, unless you have been suspected of using pot or cocaine, they do not test for that.
Right.
And I don't know if that's a good thing. Because if they did test it, we might not see the Marlins making the trades they made this offseason. Now think about that.
Oh, there's no question that something like that changes the face of a franchise forever.
It certainly did. So I'm not saying things would have been different. I'm just saying there's a good chance that it would be different. That's all.
Right.
So it's out there. And so I just don't want to, I don't want to paint a picture here that, everybody's a choir boy in the big leagues. But I really believe that the players do a much better job of taking care of themselves, being better. I don't want to say better citizens either. That's not even. They're less like frat boys than they used to be. Let's just put it that way.
Right. Well, a few more weeks of spring training left until we get to the regular season, so I'm sure we'll have more chances to talk about what's going on in the spring training as we get ready for the regular season.
We'll do that. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, Rob. That's Rob Rains. I'm Eddie Van Slyke, and thank you for joining us. A view from center field.